So welcome everyone. Nice to see there's more of us eating real life cookies this morning. And hope that we'll see ever more people here week after week. And we've come to a really interesting Parsha. We're at the Parsha of Terumah, which is the beginning of the construction of the tabernacle. We're on page 485.
What's the chapter, Rabbi?
Chapter 25. This is the moment that follows the giving of the laws. Last week we had the continuation of the giving of the laws, just as the 10 Commandments were from Sinai, so too were the commandments that followed. And now we have this big moment, which will take up in some ways the whole rest of the book of Exodus, which is the tabernacle, and then the description of all the endless details of the tabernacle, which are repeated twice, in some instances 3 times until the end of the book. And we have some very big questions about the need for a tabernacle. Why do we even need a tabernacle? What is a tabernacle for? What was the purpose of all of it? And today we're going to be talking about all of that because it's how central it is, because the tabernacle becomes a temple. And we know that even though the temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago, we're still mourning the destruction of the temple. So this goes back to the tabernacle and how important the tabernacle is. And that we're still thinking about it and mourning it. So that's going to be part of our conversation. Why the tabernacle? And then I thought, let's concentrate on one of the details. Why all these details? And so we're going to be looking, if we have time, in detail at one of those many parts of the tabernacle, and discussing why is it so important that the Torah decided to give to us this detail not once but twice, 3 times, and the fact that we read it every year in our cycle over all these weeks. So we're going to be not reading as much this time, and we'll be skipping around. So Alan, you'll only be doing a little bit of reading.
Oh,
To begin with. All right, so let's read the first bit, and then we'll skip a little bit around, and we'll go back and start to discuss. Okay, chapter 25 of Exodus.
the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. He shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them, exactly as I show you the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all its furnishings, so shall you make it."
So let's skip a few verses. The next bit is just the construction of the ark in acacia wood. And we'll skip forward to verse 17 and read just a few verses there about the cherubim, kruvim.
"You shall make a cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. Make 2 cherubim of gold. Make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the cover. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. Of one piece with the cover shall you make the cherubim at its 2 ends. The cherubim shall have their wings spread out above, shielding the cover with their wings. They shall confront each other, the faces of the cherubim being turned toward the cover. Place the cover on top of the ark. after depositing inside the ark the pact that I will give you. There I will meet with you, and I will impart to you from above the cover, from between the two cherubim that are on top of the ark of the pact, all that I will command you concerning the Israelite people.
Okay. So why did God say we need to make a tabernacle, Mishkan? Why do we have a tabernacle?
So that the presence of the Lord is among the people, because the people are nomadic. And the people don't live on Sinai, the people live on the ground in Sinai at this point. So it's,
But if they lived on Sinai, how would that be different? They could just go up the mountain, or
yeah,
But he didn't say that.
But he didn't say that, right? It doesn't say that.
And why does he make it so extravagant
Hmm.
of gold and silver? I mean, maybe because he's God and it should be worthy. If you're gonna make something, it should be worthy of God, but it just seems like it's so extravagant.
Well, I think the Lord deserves extravagance, especially if the Lord is asking for extravagance, but.
This was the first wedding gift list.
Yes, the first offering to the Lord that they have just sworn.
I was thinking about,
But he's
you know, you
asking,
make your.
bring
you
me
make-
gifts,
you make
bring
your-
me gifts, yeah.
he's telling me.
Yeah,
So why does he want it? Isn't God everywhere?
Yeah, and why does God want gifts?
Yeah, right.
What is God gonna do with gold and dolphin skins? and-
it's clearly for the people. I mean,
Okay.
it's not for the Lord, it's for the people. So the people need to be taught, I guess, to give gifts to God.
Mhm.
And these are their very first offerings to the God to whom they have sworn eternal allegiance, right?
Mhm.
But the gifts are in specific shapes. I mean, one shouldn't think that these shapes are simply capricious that he's talking about. The shape of the two cherubim, for example, are mirror images of each other on the top of the cherubim. And you're going to meet the God in the space between the mirror images. Okay, so and that's an easy one to figure out. All of these things have to do with what could you-
Symbol.
no, they're not symbols. They're analogies. They're analogies. They're not symbols. If you think about them as symbols, I think you go astray. They're analogies. They're actual shapes that we can experience internally in ourselves. Okay, they're logical shapes. Like the cherubim is a logical shape. It's a mirror image of each other. Anyway,
That's my money. We'll get to the cherubs later. That's my monodies on cherubs. There are many other.
my studies, by the way, never mentioned the cherubim in this context. Never. Not in the Guide for the Perplexed. And maybe in some other book, but not in the Guide for the Perplexed. This would be something that he wouldn't talk about.
Mhm. Well, so there, we can look at all the different materials and all the different shapes and all the different things as having a purpose and as imparting to us. And so some view them more symbolically. They're telling us about a relationship with God. The Kabbalistic view that each is an image for different of the Sefirot, the different emanations that we're balancing. But we'll get to it. We're gonna read about it. But I just want to get back to the central idea of having a tabernacle. Why a tabernacle?
Maybe God wanted to make sure there was a place for people to go.
Okay, yeah. To go to do what?
And experience his presence.
And be able to focus their attention on something that was very brilliant.
Yeah, that's that too.
Something beautiful, right? That elevates the mind and elevates the spirit. I mean, why make any prayerful space beautiful, right? Because it elevates your sense, remember once talking to a member here who was involved with the renovation of our sanctuary, and saying how it was designed, how our ceilings in our hallways before are low, So that then you open the doors and you look up, and there in your sanctuary is this big space, so it's designed in that way to kind of take you up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The tabernacle serves as a sort of a concentrated point
Mhm.
for the people to interact with or pray to God. If you didn't have that one single point, you run the danger of having a lot of different places and potentially a lot of different gods and a lot of different practices. So having the tabernacle kind of says there's going to be one place, one way of doing it. And, you know, sort of easier to communicate between God and the people that way.
Beautiful. We have this idea that the Torah, even though we haven't seen in the Torah, that this comes after the golden calf. So they saw that the people build the golden calf, and they saw, well, the people need something to worship, and if you don't give them something to worship, it's going to get messy. So we're
Something
providing
tangible,
something
but
tangible.
people aren't worshiping the tabernacle per se, they're
Uh-huh.
worshiping.
in the tabernacle, but it gives them that
spirit,
focus.
The essence, yeah.
It's giving them a
it's just the
focus point.
focus.
Maybe God had another idea too,
Plan
that
originally.
the gold and the silver wasn't theirs. They took it when they left Egypt, so it wasn't meant for them to benefit.
Mhm.
So I'm saying bring
That's
it
nice.
to the tabernacle.
I was thinking on the same line.
Don't think that this is meant for you to enrich yourself. This is meant to for a higher purpose, right? And I mean, you instill. Why do you teach your children to give, 10 cents of tzedakah, 25 cents, a quarter
Yeah.
tzedakah, not because the 25 cents is going to help anybody, but because it creates
The idea.
the idea.
The habit of
And this,
giving
you
sacrifice.
trying to remember, this happened after the golden calf.
This is not in the Torah, but some of the commentators say it did to explain.
Oh,
it. Yeah.
all right, because I was trying to think about, they had already contributed gold
Yes.
to make the golden calf.
Mhm.
Did they get back their gold in order to contribute it again?
No, they smelted down the calf.
Well, the Midrash says, just as they gave the gold to build the golden calf, they gave it to build the tabernacle. How strange are the children of Israel that they were so happy and free willing to give it to both of them. So they were able to go both ways, right? It's the sense of
Well,
the,
maybe as Norma said, they never really thought about it as theirs because they got it not from their hard work, but
Right, from
from.
well, on the other hand, it was payment for
Well,
400 years of slavery.
okay, but it.
How is the tabernacle different from an idol? What makes that thing different from what people call an idol?
Well, there's no image inside. We have an ark. The ark is as close. And we'll see why are there two cherubs? One of the reasons is to say, don't think that one of them is God's, right? These are angels, right? But on the other hand, it's not that different than any other temple, right? This would have been recognizable to the Israelites. And a lot of nomadic people had traveling, and if you go to India to this day, when there's a festival, they put their idol on top of a cart, and then they parade the cart around the city, and they dress their cart up, and they dress the idol up, and they have a little enclosure for it. So we don't have an ark, but what did they put inside the ark? They put the 10 Commandments. So the law, to some degree, is the equivalent of what we would call the idol, right? And to this day, our Torah, right? We dress it up and we put it in beautiful jewelry and we parade it around the room and we kiss it. So, but it's not an idol because it's not a representation of God. It's something you gotta.
what God gave us.
I mean, Maimonides would say, the best thing to do is to not have anything, but people need something. You need something to focus on.
It doesn't have to be a representation of God. It can be a vehicle to reach God rather than a representation of him. And then that's another way to think about these things. So somehow these are meditation pieces or mandalas, if you will, And as you think about them, it changes you in some way and opens you up to something divine.
And the truth is that even, I mean, at least in our days, I'm not sure what the ancients, but even in our days, those who have, so to speak, deities or idols will say, I don't think this is God. This is just a vehicle to help me worship God. So even then, I think we can look at it that way. But
It seems to me,
go ahead.
oh,
Bill.
thank you, that I agree with what David said very much. There's another angle here. In this text, which is the historical critics call it a P text, it's a priestly text, very concerned with how things are done according to the priestly requirements. The difference is if you go to chapter 32 for the golden calf, the people came to Aaron in the absence of Moses, and they asked him to do something like this. Here, God tells Moses to do it. It seems so simple to put it that way, but that's a huge difference from that point of view. So even if whatever you think about these
Sanctions.
cherubs, yes,
Yeah.
because otherwise I'm not sure that, I mean, the cherubs is very common in the Assyrian iconography. But here they're instructed to do it.
What about the idea that God is everywhere? Is that just a modern idea? And here it's a priestly idea that God's presence is localized, or why does God? We're not looking at it even in its context. Why does God need a place in general for God to dwell? Isn't God everywhere? Can we access God wherever we are?
If you're prepared to be able to meet up with God, most people aren't, so they need some kind of a vehicle to be able to do that, a safe place, some way to orient themselves internally to be able to do
A
that.
community gathering
That
place,
works
much like
too.
we've got the
That
synagogue.
works too.
Yeah. So that's one beautiful. That's one of the ways of looking at it. God is everywhere, but we need a place that helps us be aware and focus on God. Now we're going to look at this, but the other maybe more Kabbalistic ideas. Sure, God is everywhere, but God is can be more concentrated in certain places where there's more space made for God's spirit to come
People
in.
need a more concrete idea.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's abstract. But when there's a tabernacle, it's a place.
Mhm.
Okay, that's where God can be found.
Mhm. So, but we do have this whole tradition of the intensity of God's presence in the tabernacle, that you would enter it, and people would say, as you're walking to, this is a temple, as you're walking to Jerusalem, you would see the temple, and already you would start to feel.
Mhm.
Then you'd come closer, and you'd feel the peace, and then when you were there, and I mean, a little bit different, but it reminds me of a Hasidic story. What they would, the students of the Maggid of Mezrich, they would say, when we would travel to go see the Rebbe, when we would enter the boundaries of the city, the problems in our mind would begin to dissolve. When we came out of the carts, then we would start to begin to feel peace. And when we came in the presence of the Rebbe, we felt we were home. And so there is this idea, not just in our tradition, but in all traditions, that the holiness and sanctity and God's presence also has a radiating quality. It can be felt very intensely in some places, not just metaphorically, but tangibly.
What Alan, what you said before about spiritual, definitely.
Yeah, that's the.
I've got a comment. Didn't the Lord say in an earlier Parsha that you, the people, you are my treasure, you are my special people, you are my special
We read the
treasure,
treasure,
right? Right, and so then I'm thinking, the people who don't have any sort of focus, any sort of divine focus, right? What happens to them? They fall apart, right? There's nothing to bind them spiritually. And so spiritually, they tend to fall apart. So isn't this isn't this a way for the Lord to dwell among the people so that he can continue to be? I mean, if the people are bringing gifts to God, right?
Mhm.
Because they are his special portion, then they need to step up and show that. It's a way of committing to the covenant in a way that the Lord has committed to the people.
Mhm.
So there, I mean,
Yeah.
I hate to think of it as
No, no.
transactional, but
We need
every
transactional.
every
in our
deal
life.
is sealed
Mhm.
with at least a handshake.
Sure.
So I'm thinking that the construction of the tabernacle is the people's way of reinforcing their commitment and having the Lord dwell with them.
Beautiful. Well, the Zohar says, do you really think the tabernacle was built of gold and silver? No, it was built with the devotion of each person putting that into the gold he brought or into the hides he brought, that their love and devotion that they carried with them with each of their donation. That's really what the building was built of. That's how you build a house for God. You know, you don't, does God care if it's a dolphin skin or a goat skin or this? God doesn't care. God can dwell anywhere, but that there's this is what the people understood. And to us, he would say, build me a house out of cement and this, and we would bring our love and put it into the sand and into the thing, and this is what they understood and what they felt was appropriate for their God, and it fulfilled many, many different requirements. Go ahead.
There's another small piece of this, and that is when you build a symphony hall, people spend a lot of effort trying to get all the baffles correct, all the seating correct, and correct for what? Correct so that the emanation that comes from the orchestra players in the center of the thing reaches all of them in a way that delights them and brings them closer to something spiritual. This is the same kind of thing. I mean, so the structure of this is set up in such a way so that if we had such a thing, and whether you need the thing physically or just as an idea of the thing, just as the pattern of the thing, just as the formula of the thing, so to speak, I don't know. But I really strongly feel that that's what this stuff is about. And the Jewish religion is the only religion, I think, that gives you clues, real clues, as to how to get close to God. Real clues. I mean, not just pray, which isn't a bad thing, but real clues. This is a set of clues.
So there is so much mystery around the tabernacle and the temple and all these ideas, and there are some who will say that to keep in right now if we're thinking about the other way, the spiritual way, that there's an intensity to God's presence, the Indiana Jones in the Ark and all those ideas, but that there's certain materials that help keep that presence pristine. And if you do believe that God can take some kind of semi-tangible form in this, when you feel if you go to a service and you really feel musical Shabbat,
Right.
and you really feel God's presence strongly, what is it that you're feeling? If you're feeling it, then there's some tangibility to it. And if there's some tangibility to it, there can be even more tangibility to it. There can be, it can feel very tangible. And what is the Shekhinah? God, the female presence of God in Kabbalah, the Shekhinah is the most tangible part of God's presence. So tangible, you can really feel it. And so some materials will keep that presence from dissipating and more pristine. That's another whole science that some people will look at this. And if you look here, you have literal clues with the materials that they had available. It might be different in our time, for how to create a place where that spirit is kept, nourished and nurtured, so that you could, what is a holy space? A holy space is a place where you can go and feel closer to God. So as moderns, we prefer to look at it as a place where we feel elevated and therefore more able to connect. But for thousands of years, with the way people believed, and I think I tend to believe in that, it's because God's presence is built up and nourished. It's like a treasure house. And every time you go there and someone prays a sincere prayer, they're adding their prayer to it. And so it develops a quality. And, you know, I remember once I had a colleague at rabbinical school who did not believe in a God that can act in the world, but believed the God was just goodness and everything. But one day I was with him and he said, oh, you know, come to this Torah. He says, this Torah has a lot of presence. And I'm going to say, well, how can you believe that this Torah has presence and there's something that's unusual about this Torah, but you don't believe in a God that has presence too? So, you know, we're full of contradictions in our world, but there is this idea that there's places and people can have presence. And so this is the ultimate presence, right? God brought its presence into this space, and you would go in it and feel that presence so much that only Moses could really approach it in the most pristine
But
form.
like in
Yeah.
Sfat, in
Yeah.
Orthodox.
Sure,
Shul, but more like in Sfat, where it's
Yeah.
in the middle,
yeah,
you know, is that so that
It's
the
the Sephardic.
presence can be, this part can be felt all around everywhere?
so it's a good question. You know, the right in Sephardic shuls and in Tzfat, the bima's in the middle, and people sit around it, and it's high up. I mean, yeah, maybe it is because that works better with feeling the presence. You know, we're all around each other, so we also we're a concentrated circle. There's one of the modern kind of young up and coming, not so up and coming anymore, but really successful Jewish liturgist and singer is Joey Weissenberg. And he's creating he's like the new Shlomo Carlebach. He's creating a lot of the melodies that are going throughout the Jewish world. And the first thing that he does when he comes to community to teach it to sing is he says, instead of pews and rows, sit in circles around, concentric circles. I always find it a bit gimmicky, but it does work. When you're sitting in circles around something, you feel a lot more togetherness and you build a lot more connection. It's a lot better than even when you do a half circle.
So circles are one of the keys. Circles are one of the keys. And if you look in the circles, squares, mirrors, these are all sort of geometric shapes that are very important in this. And because geometric shapes sort of ring at every level of being, so to speak. You know, when God descends, well, that's what the rabbi's talking about, the notion of ascending and descending. When God descends into a place, it helps if you somehow are in a place that takes a shape that sort of amplifies that descent. And if you're in a circle, it does that. If you're in a square inside a circle, then you get even more of a blast. And I mean, these may sound very, very strange, these notions, but they're not so strange. They're talked about pre essentially Descartes, where these particular shapes were more or less they were thought of in completely different ways. They were thought of as being somewhat divine, the shapes themselves.
We talk about that, about descending and ascending, but we really think that God is some high up place and taking a plane down, and that's just our human way of understanding the movement of spirit. But really, it's different states of consciousness or different. Or from where does God's presence enter our physical realm? It's not from some upper place or some downer place. It's just, that's how we understand it, because we're concrete creatures and we're used to understanding things in this way. And for us, up means expanse and down means, you know, more in the earth. So that's the way we describe it. But we're essentially trying to use words to describe something that's indescribable, which is also what they're doing. And this whole process is about something that's hard to describe with physical. And yet it's in some ways, it's the most beautiful thing about the tabernacle and the temple, that it is that place of spirit meeting physical and in every kind of way.
Isn't that one of the reasons why often you and Stuart and Charles come down so that we're more connected?
Yeah, exactly. You know, it creates a psychological connection, I think, instead of being high up on the bima, which makes you feel hard to access, or, you know, and. Yeah, and I think psychologically it's nicer, and also you feel more, when dominion, I mean, it's the essentially the idea of dominion. And I mean, I think, and I don't think it's psychological, but when we have 5 people here and 5 people on Zoom, it feels a little bit lacking. I don't know if you feel that, Alan. You feel like when you have 8 or 10 people here, you feel, okay, we've got a fullness of people here, of sound, of, you know, you can feel.
Yeah.
A presence, yeah, you feel a presence, and okay, on Zoom, it gives you something, but it's not quite the same as having 10 people praying together. That gives you
Well,
something.
and if you took that table away, we would be in a circle.
That's true, we'd be in a circle. Oh, this is a circle, really.
Oh, here,
Well,
we have
are
the
in a
circle, but David is right here.
Yes, we are
David
in
and
a circle.
Bonnie make. the
David and
circle.
Bonnie,
The
and
rectangle,
Charles and
yes,
Phil.
yes.
It's like a-
So it's, I mean, this is, it's interesting because in some ways it's a semi-scientific way of understanding spirit. Really, what's this all about? It's a semi-scientific way of understanding how spirit is kept and nurtured. And I think with the Enlightenment and our kind of the explosion, the using of science to understand the outer world, we tend to look at that and think this doesn't make much sense. But there's some who think that okay, what's the next stage? It's understanding spirit of that same kind of mind that we've tried to understand the outer world, to understand the inner world, and that will be big advancement in religion and in spirituality. But let's move forward a little bit. Unless anybody else had anything else to add, and start to get to the commentaries. I think there's some interesting stuff here this week. To help elucidate.
And we don't have to feel every week that we have to totally get through the whole.
We're not gonna get through the whole thing. No, we can't.
Too much here.
I bring this so that also if anybody's interested, they can look afterwards.
Right, yeah,
And I
Um,
do. I really like
which is good.
this, you know.
there's some, the commentaries have a lot of really interesting stuff about what we're talking about. And this is my little digest. Who wants to read Ramban?
The secret of the tabernacle is that the glory which abode upon Mount Sinai openly should abide upon it in a concealed manner. All right, I need to process that. For just as it is said there, and the glory of the eternal abode upon Mount Sinai, so it is written of the tabernacle, and the glory of the eternal filled the tabernacle. Thus, Israel always had with them in the tabernacle the glory which appeared to them on Mount Sinai. And when Moses went into the tabernacle, he would hear the divine utterance being spoken to him in the same way as on Mount Sinai. Thus, just as it is said at the giving of the Torah, out of heaven he made thee to hear his voice. Thee to hear his voice. Okay, that's beautiful. So it is written of the tabernacle, and he heard the voice speaking unto him from above the ark cover.
So this is like, Nancy, your first comment, right? They couldn't be at Sinai, so they're carrying Sinai with them, really. And the same glory, it's with them. Sinai is with them. And really in our synagogues, in the ark is also supposed to be, we're carrying Sinai with us. We're not just carrying a text, but we're carrying Sinai
And
with us.
isn't that when we leave, we take some of that with?
And then we take a little bit of Sinai with us for our weeks.
Is that the exact quote? And he heard the voice speaking unto him from above the ark cover? That's where is?
It is.
That's what, the 28, which one? I can't remember.
Times, but that's several times in the Torah it talks about God speaking to Moses from above.
So did they say from above the ark cover, or did they say from between the cherubim?
I mean, there's both. It says from between the cherubim, from above the ark cover. You know, I mean, it's like we said yesterday. You heard God's voice from within the mountain. What does that mean? You know, where, you know, is it? Did God put a speaker inside the Mount Sinai and?
No, it just resonated.
Resonator.
Put a little speaker Those little Bose speakers are small, so you can't see them next to the ark. So you
Nancy,
get
how do
the-
you have time to eat when you have to, every word you love to decipher?
No, it's just things occur
I
to
know, I
me.
see it. I see
It
your
also
mind working.
helps me, it
Yeah.
helps me
Understood,
process.
yeah.
What it. But there is clearly a place within the sanctuary, within the Holy of Holies, where Moses and God are in an alignment where Moses can hear God's voice. And that could be as much about Moses as about God, or so let's move ahead. So Rashi,
By the way, just to stress this a little bit more, if he heard it from between the cherubim, he's hearing it in a finite discontinuity. In other words, there's nothing there. The cherubim are separated by a mirror, okay, which throws one on the right to be the mirror of the one on the left. And you've seen pictures like that where you have a mirror in the center and something on the right and something on the left. In the center with the mirror is the place that cannot be spoken of, okay, that where one turns into the other in some sort of magical way. And one of the places where they're talking about Moses hearing God's voice, it's between the cherubim. That's exactly at that spot.
not sure about if the mirror adds to this or not, the way you're talking about, but think about it. The whole effect is you're walking more and more into concentrated, right? At first there's a big courtyard, then you walk into a smaller courtyard. Now I'm thinking about the temple even more. And you walk into the temple, if you're able to go inside, there's a Holy of Holies, and you pull the curtain, and there are two cherubs facing each other, pointing your focus into the middle onto the ark. So it's like this kind of movement inwards into a complete focal point, right?
Purposeful, yeah.
It's very, very purposeful.
Towards nothing that is not,
Spirit,
right, pure spirit, if you will.
to the self. Well, this is the Romans, the Greeks would laugh at the Israelites and say, what is
There's
wrong
nothing
with
there,
your
yeah.
temple? Your temple
There's
is
nothing
empty.
there,
You know, what's wrong with your temple? Temple is empty. You're lucky there's nothing in it. You know, why? What's your? It's like having a house with nothing in it. You know, why can't you furnish it?
Or having a temple with the cornerstone being missing, which is
Yeah,
the thing.
exactly.
So what we're after, we're worshiping the cornerstone that's missing.
Cornerstone is itself, is your own spirit, maybe.
Interesting that the people who gave us philosophy
Yes.
have to have a
Yeah.
corporeal, physical,
That's
material,
interesting. Yeah.
idol god to focus on.
Well, maybe they separated philosophy and religion in a way that we were never quite able to, but I'm not sure.
The other interesting thing
Yeah.
about that is their gods were jealous and
They're
spiteful, toward human beings, whereas, the true God is loving and kind and generous, which is.
Yeah,
Yes,
Beautiful.
the Greek and Roman gods had
None of those
talking
about
they were
it.
playful and they like to. Beautiful.
opposite.
Thank you for bringing that. The Greek gods like to play around with humans.
Yeah.
Ha ha ha. Little, but
Very manipulative.
so the other, I don't think we're gonna get to it, but the other interpretation of the cherubs is they represent God and the people. And so God loves the Jewish people the way these two cherubim were looking at each other. And one of the commentaries says that the cherubs were male and female. And so that the love of God and the people are like male and female together, and that they were used to embrace at times, like supernaturally embrace. And then the question was, well, why didn't they make them like a parent and a child? It says, well, because the love of a pair of a man, of the love of two lovers is a love that's always accessible, and that's kind of the love of a child and a parent, and it is accessible, but it's kind of uneven in some ways. And they wanted, and also because, again, there's a comment we're not going to get to today, but in the thing that there's no intermediary. God wants us to know that the love with God, there's no intermediary. It's just like the two cherubs. Okay, let's move forward. Rashi, Let them make me a sanctuary. Nancy, do you mind reading this?
And let them make me a sanctuary. Let them make to the glory of my name a place of holiness.
And so let's just go forward, because I just wanted to bring that as one of the ways of looking at it. It's for the glory of
A
God.
place for the glory of my name. You want me to continue?
Yes, please, yes. Well, yeah.
Whatever the Hebrew reads as, it translates to, I will dwell among them permanently in order to receive their prayers and their sacrificial offerings in a manner similar to the way I displayed my presence at the mount. The very concept of the tabernacle leads the intelligent viewer to conclude that hidden deep within it, God's presence, Shekinah, must be manifest. This was the closest to God's essence that the prophets were shown in their visions. The terrestrial tabernacle, if viewed as parallel to God's throne in the celestial domains, contains sections of progressively higher levels of sanctity, which progressively restricted the type of people allowed to approach those levels. The Torah itself, for which the Holy Ark served as repository, was in an ark constructed of wood, but overlaid with gold on the outside and on the inside and on the outside, to reflect the saying of our sages in Yuma 72, that every Torah scholar whose external appearance did not reflect his internal stature was not a Torah scholar at all. Did not reflect his internal stature.
Your internal and outer have to be the
Yeah,
same.
they have to be the same.
Yeah.
Okay, the levels of sanctity in the tabernacle, beginning already with the courtyard around it, were not sealed off from one another, but on the contrary, were connected to one another all the way to the innermost sanctuary to demonstrate that sanctity is attainable progressively. On top of the physical box containing spiritual teaching, the Torah, there was placed a lid also made from pure gold, which symbolized the image of God in the sense that man was created in the image of God. This lid was not linked, not attached to the ark itself. The detached nature of this lid,
Chorus, yeah.
like kippah, symbolized that at a certain level of holiness, there is no longer a physical bond with the human body, with the terrestrial domain, a domain which is essentially mortal, that is requiring regeneration from time to time. The description of the cherubs on top of the
Chorus.
facing each other, verse 20, symbolizes the interaction of the spiritual message contained in the Torah and its transmission to the human being studying it. The cherubs themselves are described as facing the lid, that is, facing the Torah that is beneath that lid. That makes sense. As a result of such an attitude to Torah, that is, looking to it for inspiration, the cherubs are then described as spreading their wings in an upward direction, as if reflecting that they had received spiritual inspiration, enabling them to fly. Oh, how beautiful. This description of the cherub's posture reflects what Solomon described in Proverbs 15:24, whatever it says. For an intelligent man, the path of life is upward. As a result of our relating to Torah in the manner described, we will merit what Isaiah 66:2 describes as whatever.
So then you will see, you will look. Yeah.
When he refers to the prerequisite character traits necessary to merit divine inspiration.
So this is like a whole symbolic or image looking at all the different elements.
There's a lot here.
Right, beautiful there, right? Let's keep moving forward. I just wanted to bring that as an overall view of all these different elements. And now we're going to get back to the idea of this thing of meeting, and someone else read the next, Har Zion.
According to all I shall show you, etc. In Midrash Hagadol, on our verse, it is reported that when God told Moses to build a sanctuary for him, Moses was dumbfounded, asking God that seeing that neither the heavens nor the heaven of heavens could contain him, how could a structure on earth possibly house him? God reassured him, saying that Moses had misunderstood what God had in mind when he issued the directive. When God spoke of the sanctuary, he showed Moses a structure of 20 beams in the north, 20 beams in the south, joined by 8 beams in the west. God explained that he would reduce himself in honor of Israel and out of love for them. We must ask ourselves, who is the source that can tell us exactly what transpired between God and Moses at that time? Although the words of our sages were based on tradition, the fact remains that scripture does not even hint at such a conversation. When we apply a moral dimension to the interpretation of this paragraph, it will be seen that God spoke about taking up residence among the Jewish people, not merely as a consequence of their constructing the tabernacle, but that he said, I would dwell amongst them. Even before having shown Moses what the tabernacle was to look like, verses 8 and 9 respectively, the message is that the concept of sanctity in its various levels of intensity is independent of measurements. It is a concept which transcends such considerations. To illustrate what I mean, take a look at Avot 3:7. Rabbi Glick describes that God's presence is attracted to even a single individual who occupies himself with words of Torah. He derives this from Exodus 20:21, where God says, wherever I allow my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. Rabbi Glick had first made similar statements regarding groups of people engaging in Torah study. The reason he mentioned groups of different sizes was to show us that God's presence, sanctity, is found in different degrees of intensity depending on circumstances. That is why the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah 74 tells us that God's presence is not to be found in a congregation numbering fewer than 600,000. Whoa. The various statements of our sages dealing with the presence teach us that the quality of such presence varies almost infinitely, between a minimum of 1 and a maximum which is infinite. When God first told Moses that he would take up residence among the Jewish people, Moses did not know what degree of holiness such presence implied. He therefore proceeded to ask God, how can your holiness be confined to earth? God replied by telling Moses that it would be in accordance with all that he would show Moses. By showing Moses the celestial tabernacle, he made him aware that God would transfer his entire holiness to earth, so to speak. The Israelites were therefore qualified to be the carriers of
The
the.
Merkava of the chair, that's the Ezekiel's chariots.
Okay, so by showing Moses, he made aware that God transferred his holiness. Okay, so that's a part.
So it's saying that
Wow.
sure, God is everywhere, but God is in more intensity in certain places and certain groupings, just like God is in more intensity in 10 in the minyan. And God is with one person when you're studying Torah, but when you're 6 people and person and another few, and there's more, and when you're
I have a question
Sure.
though about this midrash in
Mhm.
Bereshit Rabbah,
uh-huh.
where it says God's presence is not to be found in a congregation numbering fewer than 600,000.
Mhm. Well, it's one of the strange is not to be found, yeah. It's saying that there's a level of God's presence that cannot be found in anything less than 600,000. So what it's saying is that you can't just expect God's presence to be the same, whatever it is.
And
And
this says is not to be.
I know,
found
so
in
there's-
anything less.
there's a lot of discussion in many different places in the Talmud about where is God's presence felt, and there's no single logic. Because sometimes they say God's presence can only be found among 600,000, and other people said God's presence is found when 2 people study Torah. The other person says no, God's presence is found when 10 people are praying together. Another person says when one person is doing a good deed, and then another person says, well, there was one synagogue in Babylon where the God's presence was definitely there. And I says, well, how do you know? Well, when I was there, I heard something knocking up in the attic and nobody was there. And the other person said, well, because we know that since Ezekiel's time, Ezekiel used to go up into that synagogue and fill it with holiness. So people are grappling with the same ideas that we are, which is where is God's presence found and what? There's no single logic. It's not theology, it's exploration.
But you know,
So
the
it-
word consequence,
May I just ask, Rabbi, where it says, it's in the Orach Chaim, I think, where he says, God said he would reduce himself to come and to the people. Is that, that's in quotes. Is that is that a translation of, or it's a translation of something, but what is it a translation of? Because it's a very interesting statement, and it sounds like it could be very much like a Pauline idea, a Christian idea, really, of God coming to earth.
It's a Kabbalistic idea.
Ah,
The God, the name for it at this very moment is escaping me, but it's the Ari who really brought it in a major way. But God makes himself small to allow creation to happen, first of all, but also for God's presence to come into us and into the world. It's called Tzimtzum, that's what it is, Tzimtzum. God contracts himself, and that's what allows that presence for the whole of the world. Of the reality could not exist if God did not contract himself, because God would just be below it all to pieces. So God contracts himself and allows existence to happen.
but isn't
thank you very much. That's very helpful.
a more harsh word than it would be as a result or a reward of building the tabernacle? Because
Where do you-
consequence to me sounds like not so nice.
Which part are you
It will be in the
reading?
very, it will be seen that God spoke about taking up residence amongst the Jewish people, not merely as a consequence of their construction of the tabernacle. So I would think that it would be,
Yeah.
consequence just seems like a harsh word.
Here, I don't think it's meant harshly. It could be that it's just as a reaction.
That's the result.
I mean, it's exploring that idea. It's like God only came to be among the Jewish people because they built him a little house. If not, God would not be amongst them. And the answer in typical Jewish fashion is yes and no. Like, yes, God's presence is absolutely everywhere, but you're building a house for him in all of these mysterious ways also creates a way for God's presence to be tangibly
I can imagine some rabbis could sit there and argue that for 10 hours.
forever, right? Forever. One of those questions that's forever.
And going back to the 600,000,
Yes.
it just seems,
It is a lot of people.
It's not an
well,
arbitrary number.
It seems to be saying,
Yeah.
right, wasn't there like 600,000 males?
600,000 males
who
who
left
left
Egypt.
Egypt. Exactly.
And it seems to be saying that if you don't have all the Israelites together,
That's
if
exactly.
you don't
what
have all the
it's
Hebrews together believing in me, I ain't gonna be there for you.
saying. In the same way.
And,
Yes, that's exactly
and,
what it's saying.
okay, so
That's
Yes,
exactly what
what I
it's saying.
read
The
it as.
600,000 represents all of the Jewish people. And so to some degree, it's saying,
you
right,
have to
with
have
all
all
the
the Jewish people
with-
there together, or I won't be there
fully.
for them, right?
I mean, it's kind of like that same idea that says, right, that if all the Jewish people were to observe the Shabbat for 2 Shabbats in a row, Messiah would come, right? Mashiach would come. There's kind of this idea that if we're all aligned and in the right place, then God's presence is fully amongst us, right? That's where we can carry them. And imagine if all of humanity is in the right place, what that would do for be able to carry. Because in the end, God's presence doesn't truly dwell between 2 cherubs or in a house, but dwells in our hearts, right? And then where God says, make me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst them. But really, the literal is amongst you. So, right, so God is saying, I want to dwell amongst you. And so there's the idea that the third temple is in essence, actually truly in our own hearts. And so that's why the last comment about how do we create the tabernacle inside of us is very useful for us. I mean, yes, we do want to create holy spaces, and there are a lot of hints here of how you create a holy space in your own house. If you want to create a place where you're doing minyan, maybe it shouldn't be the messy place next to the bathroom, or there. And in the Talmud it says, you can't pray inside a bathroom, You're allowed to pray inside a bathroom, you know? You should maybe make a place that's harmonious and beautiful, and, you know, if you have the funds, put some gold around, you know? Maybe you don't need the gold, just create a beautiful place and make sure your mind is quiet when you go inside of it, and try and create a focal point so that you feel focused when you're there. And so there is some benefit in there, but even more, how do you create the inner vessel for God's presence? How do you make sure your inner and your outer is in tune? And how do you aspire so much to holiness that there's no moral barrier between you and holiness? You've created one place inside of yourself that's a holy of holies, or you learn to access the holy of holies that's within yourself. And so it speaks to us on that level as well as the outer. And I think it challenges all of us, you know, how do we create the holy of holies, or access the holy of holies inside of our own hearts? And that place inside of us, it's only gold, right? We all have a place where it's not easy to be reached. The windless, it's described in some tradition as a windless room, right? A room where there's a candle, where there's no wind, it can never be blown out. If you can access that place inside yourself, then you've accessed the Holy of Holies. And that's a place where God's voice is speaking to you, if you can hear it. And that's the place where you can, the still small voice where you can do it. And sometimes you have to go through other spaces until you get there. But that's what we're all looking for. So we'll continue next week and how we talk about the tabernacle.